I always thought our life was a tapestry, woven with care, each thread a choice, a moment, a promise. My name is Daniel, and for 17 years, Clara and I built something I believed was unbreakable. Our home in Asheville, a craftsman-style house with creaking floors and a garden she tended with devotion, was our sanctuary. I'm a restorer, breathing life into antique furniture, my hands coaxing stories from worn wood. Clara, a graphic designer, filled our world with color, her laughter a melody that greeted me each evening. Our daughter, Lila, 16 and fierce, was the heartbeat of it all. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, until I noticed the fraying edges. Started subtly, like a whisper you're not sure you heard. Clara's phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was now glued to her hand. She'd tilt the screen away when I passed, her fingers dancing in a rhythm that felt secretive. At dinner, her eyes drifted, not to me or Lila, but to some distant place I couldn't reach. I'd ask about her day, and her answers were clipped, as if I were a stranger intruding on her thoughts. Just work, she'd say, her smile tight, like a door half closed. I told myself it was stress. Her firm had landed a big client, and deadlines were relentless. But doubt, once planted, grows like ivy, creeping into every corner. One evening, as rain tapped the windows, I found her sketchbook open on the kitchen table. Clara's designs were usually vibrant, but these were different, dark, jagged lines, a chaos of ink that felt like a scream on paper. Tucked between the pages was a receipt from a cafe I didn't recognize, dated a week ago, for 2 coffees and a pastry. The timestamp was midday, when she told me she was at a client meeting. My chest tightened, not from anger but from a hollow ache, like standing at the edge of a cliff. I didn't confront her. Instead, I memorized the cafe's name, the Saffron Veil. It was a thread I'd follow, though I wasn't ready for where it would lead. That night, I lay beside her, the space between us vast despite the shared sheets. Her breathing was steady, but I sensed a restlessness, as if even in sleep she was somewhere else. I stared at the ceiling, replaying moments. Her late nights, her guarded phone, the way she'd stopped wearing the silver bracelet I'd restored for our anniversary. Each memory was a splinter, lodging deeper. I wasn't a jealous man, but I was no fool. Something was shifting and I needed to know what or who was pulling her away. The receipt burned in my mind, a map to a truth I both craved and dreaded. The next morning I drove to the Saffron Veil. It was tucked in a narrow street, its windows draped in amber curtains, a place that felt like a secret. I didn't go inside. I sat in my truck, watching patrons come and go, imagining Clara among them, laughing with someone who wasn't me. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale, as I fought the urge to storm in and demand answers. Instead, I noted the hours, the faces, the rhythm of the place. If she was meeting someone here, I'd find out. I wasn't ready to accuse her, not yet. But the seed of betrayal, whether real or imagined, was taking root, and I couldn't unplant it. Back home, Clara was in the garden, her hands buried in soil, planting lavender. She looked up, her eyes catching mine, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd married, open, unguarded. "You're quiet today," she said, brushing dirt from her cheek. I wanted to ask about the cafe, the receipt, the distance, but the words stuck. "Just thinking," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside. She nodded, returning to her plants, and I wondered if she sensed the weight of my gaze, searching for cracks in the life we'd built. Days bled into weeks, and the cafe became my obsession. I didn't tell Clara I'd been there, didn't mention the receipt I tucked into my wallet like evidence. Instead, I watched her, studying the woman I thought I knew. She was still Clara. Her laugh still filled the house when Lila told stories. Her fingers still traced patterns on my arm when we watched old movies. But there was a veil now, thin but undeniable, separating us. I started checking her schedule, casually asking about her plans, noting when she left and returned. Each discrepancy felt like a stone in my pocket, heavy and cold. One Tuesday, she said she had a late meeting. "Clients being picky," she sighed, grabbing her bag. I nodded, kissing her forehead, but as her car pulled away, I followed. It wasn't planned. I was in my truck, heading to a client's house to deliver a restored dresser, but my hands turned the wheel toward her office instead. Her car wasn't there. My pulse quickened, a drumbeat of suspicion. I drove to the Saffron Veil, parking across the street. There she was, through the amber-curtained window, sitting across from a man. He was lean, with dark hair and a smile that seemed too easy, too familiar. They leaned close, her hand brushing his as she laughed. I didn't move. My breath fogged the window, my heart a fist in my chest. I watched them share a dessert, their forks clinking, a ritual that felt intimate, stolen. When they left, he held the door for her, his hand grazing her back. They walked to her car, lingering too long. Her face tilted up to his in a way that carved a hollow in me. I didn't follow them further. I drove home, the image of them branded in my mind, each detail a cut. His laugh, her ease, the way she hadn't looked at me like that in months. At home, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by half-finished projects. The scent of varnish and wood grounded me, but my thoughts spiraled. Who was he? A coworker? A client? Someone she'd met by chance? Or worse, someone she'd sought out? I pulled out my laptop, something I hadn't done before, and searched her social media. Clara wasn't active online, but I found a new follower, a man named Elias. His profile sparse but his face unmistakable. It was him. My stomach churned as I scrolled, finding no direct messages, no proof, but the connection was enough to fuel my dread. When Clara came home, she was humming, her cheeks flushed. "Good meeting?" I asked, my voice calm, though my hands shook as I sanded a chair. "Exhausting," she said, dropping her bag. "I'm starving." She moved to the kitchen, oblivious to the storm in me. I wanted to demand answers, to show her the receipt, to ask about Elias, but I held back. Confrontation would tip my hand, and I wasn't ready. I needed more certainty, not just suspicion. That night, as she slept, I checked her phone. No passcode change, a small mercy. There were texts from Elias, innocent on the surface, about design ideas, coffee plans, but the frequency, the late hours, told a different story. The next day, I called a friend, Mark, who ran a small security firm. I didn't want to be this man, spying, doubting, but the ache in my chest left no choice. "Just need to know," I told him, handing over Elias's name and the cafe's address. Mark didn't judge. He nodded, promising discretion. As I hung up, I felt a shift, like stepping onto a path I couldn't unchoose. Clara was slipping away, and with her, the life I trusted. I wasn't sure what I'd do with the truth, but I knew it would change everything. The man in the cafe wasn't just a shadow, he was a thief, and I was starting to imagine how I'd make him pay. Mark's call came a week later, his voice low, professional. "Got something," he said. "Meet me at the diner on Patton Avenue, noon." I spent the morning in my workshop, my hands moving over a mahogany table, but my mind was elsewhere. Clara had left early, saying she had a deadline, her smile as convincing as ever. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't trust myself to speak without unraveling. Instead, I drove to the diner, my truck's engine humming a rhythm that matched my nerves. The air felt thick, like the world knew what was coming. Mark slid into the booth across from me, a manila envelope in hand. "You sure about this?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, though my throat tightened. He pushed the envelope toward me. Inside were photos, grainy but clear. Clara and Elias at the Saffron Vale, their hands touching over a table. Another of them walking, her arm looped through his, her head resting on his shoulder. The last one was the worst. Them in a park, sitting on a bench, her lips brushing his cheek. Each image was a blade, slicing through the life I'd built in my head. There was a report to Elias Moreau, 38, a freelance photographer, recently hired by Clara's firm for a campaign. No criminal record, no wife, no kids. Just a man who'd walked into my world and taken what wasn't his. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat there, the diner's clatter fading to a hum, and felt something harden inside me. Mark watched, silent, until I folded the envelope and tucked it into my jacket. "What now?" he asked. "I don't know," I lied. Truth was, I was already imagining it. Revenge, not loud or reckless, but precise, like carving a name into wood. I thanked him, paid for his coffee, and left. The photos burned against my chest, a secret I carried home. Clara was in the living room when I got back, sketching on her tablet. Lila was at soccer practice, the house quiet except for the scratch of her stylus. I watched her, this woman I'd loved for nearly 2 decades, and felt like I was seeing a stranger. Her hair was loose, her feet tucked under her, a picture of calm. Did she think of him when she sat here? Did she compare us, weighing my calloused hands against his artist's fingers? I poured a glass of water, my movements slow, deliberate, and asked, "How's the campaign going?" She looked up, her eyes flickering. "Good," she said. "We're almost done." The word stung. A confirmation she didn't know I'd heard. That night I didn't sleep. I lay beside her, the envelope hidden in my workshop, and planned. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to understand the depth of her betrayal, to know how far she'd gone. I started small, installing an app on my phone to mirror her texts. Felt like crossing a line, but she'd crossed one first. Messages from Elias popped up. Casual, flirty, arranging meetups. "Missed you at the cafe," one read. Her reply, "Soon." My blood ran cold, but I kept reading, each word a brick in the wall I was building. I wanted to know every lie, every moment she'd chosen him over me. The next day, I drove to Elias's studio, a loft in the River Arts District. I didn't go in. I sat outside, watching him through the window as he adjusted lights, his movements confident, careless. He didn't know I existed, didn't know the storm he'd stirred. I imagined walking in, breaking his cameras, his hands, his smug smile, but that was too simple. Revenge needed to be deeper, something that would linger. As I drove away, an idea took shape, sharp and cold. I'd dismantle their world, piece by piece, and they'd never see it coming. Clara thought she could keep her secrets, but I was learning them all, and soon, I'd use them to make her feel the weight I carried now. Pretending became my craft, as meticulous as restoring a chipped veneer. I smiled at Clara over breakfast, asked about her plans, kissed her cheek before she left. Each gesture was calculated, a performance to keep her unsuspecting. Inside, I was a furnace, burning with the photos, the texts, the image of her lips on his cheek. Lila noticed my quietness, her brows furrowing one morning. "You okay, Dad?" she asked. Cereal spoon paused. I ruffled her hair, forcing a grin. "Just tired, kiddo." I couldn't let her see the fracture. Lila was my anchor, the one piece of this life I'd protect at all costs. My days split into two tracks. The husband Clara saw and the man unraveling her lies. The app on my phone was a constant pulse, feeding me their messages. Elias sent her poems, short, pretentious lines about light and longing. She replied with emojis, hearts, words like beautiful. I read them in my workshop, the glow of my phone casting shadows on the tools I'd once used to build, not destroy. One message stopped me cold. "Tomorrow, my place, 7? Her reply, "Can't wait." Tomorrow was Friday, when she told me she had a team dinner. The lie was bold, and I hated how it sharpened my resolve. I decided to see it for myself. Friday evening, I told Clara I had a late delivery, a table for a client across town. She nodded, distracted, already half gone in her mind. I drove to Elias's loft, parking a block away. The street was alive with artists and tourists, but I felt invisible, a ghost haunting their story. At 7:15, her car pulled up. She stepped out, her dress one I hadn't seen before, green and flowing, her hair loose. She looked like she was meeting a lover, not a colleague. My chest ached, but I stayed still, watching as she knocked, as he opened the door, as she stepped inside with a smile that used to be mine. I waited. Minutes stretched into hours, my truck a cage for my thoughts. What were they doing? Talking? Laughing? More? The uncertainty was a blade, twisting with every tick of the clock. At 10:30, she emerged, her face flushed, her dress slightly wrinkled. He followed, kissing her at the door, a kiss that lingered too long. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, but I didn't move. Not yet. I followed her home at a distance, her taillights a beacon of betrayal. When she walked into our house, I was already there, in the kitchen, pretending I'd just gotten back. "Good dinner?" I asked, my voice steady. "Yeah," she said, avoiding my eyes. "I'm beat." That night, I lay awake, her breathing soft beside me, and planned. Revenge wasn't enough. It had to be art, a masterpiece of consequence. I started digging deeper, using skills I didn't know I had. I found Elias's portfolio online, his clients, his upcoming gigs. I learned his habits: coffee at 9 a.m., gallery visits on Sundays. I hacked into Clara's work email, a simple guess at her password, Lila's birthday, unchanged. There, I found their plans. A weekend getaway next month, disguised as a conference. The audacity of it fueled me. I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was a strategist, building a trap they'd walk into blindly. The next morning, I called a gallery owner I'd restored frames for. "Know an Elias Moreau?" I asked casual. She did. He was pitching a solo show, banking on it to boost his name. Perfect. I thanked her, hung up, and smiled for the first time in weeks. I'd start there with his dreams, his pride. Clara thought she could live two lives, but I'd make sure both crumbled. As I sanded a chair, the rhythm calming, I imagined her face when she realized the cost of her choices. Not just losing me, but everything she thought she'd gained. The game was on, and I was playing to win. The gallery was my opening move, a quiet thrust into Elias's world. I met with Helen, the owner, at her space downtown, a sleek loft filled with abstract paintings and sharp light. I'd restored a dozen frames for her over the years, earning her trust. Over coffee, I mentioned Elias, feigning curiosity. "Heard he's pitching a show," I said, stirring my cup. Helen nodded, her lips pursing. "He's talented, but arrogant. Thinks he's a lock." I leaned in, voice low. "Check his references. I heard he's flaked on projects." It was a lie, but doubt is a seed that grows fast. She raised an eyebrow, jotting a note. "I'll look into it," she said. I left, the first domino tipped. Back home, Clara was oblivious, humming as she watered her lavender. I watched her through the window, my heart a tangle of love and rage. How could she tend our garden while planting lies elsewhere? I kept up the act. Dinner together, laughing at Lila's stories, my hand brushing hers like nothing had changed. But each touch was a reminder of her duplicity, her ease in his loft, her dress I'd never seen. The texts kept coming, their getaway plans firming up. A cabin in the Blue Ridge, 2 nights, a work trip. She'd sell me with a smile. I let her think I believed it, my silence a weapon. I dug deeper into Elias, finding cracks. His portfolio was strong, but his finances were shaky. Freelance life left him stretched, banking on the gallery show for stability. I found his landlord's name through public records, a small act of research that felt like Betrayal's mirror. Posing as a concerned client, I called, dropping hints about late payments, nothing overt, just enough to stir unease. "He's a good tenant, usually," the landlord said, but I heard the pause, the worry. Another seed planted. I wasn't destroying him, not yet, but I was tightening the noose. Clara's lies grew bolder. She mentioned the conference over breakfast, her eyes steady as she described sessions and networking. I nodded, asking about logistics, watching her weave the story. "Sounds intense," I said, sipping coffee. "Need me to book anything?" She shook her head. "Too quick." "All set," she said, and I saw the flicker. Guilt or maybe fear. I didn't push. Instead, I checked her email later, finding the cabin reservation, Elias's name on it. My stomach twisted, but I copied the details, every word a blueprint for what was coming. I started on Clara's world. Too subtle but sharp. Her firm valued her, but trust was fragile. I sent an anonymous email to her boss, a vague note about personal distractions affecting deadlines. I used a burner account, untraceable, my words careful but pointed. It wouldn't ruin her, but it would raise questions, make her squirm. I wanted her to feel the ground shift, to wonder without knowing why. At home, I left clues. A receipt from the saffron veil on the counter, saying I'd found it in the car. Her face paled, but she recovered, claiming it was a client lunch. I smiled, letting her think she dodged it. Lila was my shield, the reason I didn't snap. One evening, she showed me a drawing, a treehouse we'd planned to build. "Can we start soon?" she asked, her eyes bright. I hugged her, promising we would, though my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't let Clara's choices touch Lila, but I knew they would, eventually. That night, I sat in my workshop, the envelope of photos on the bench. I didn't look at them, I didn't need to. They were etched in me, driving every move. Elias's gallery pitch was next week. Helen had texted, saying his references were mixed. Clara's boss had replied to my email, asking her for a meeting. The pieces were aligning, and I felt the cold thrill of control. Revenge wasn't loud, it was a whisper, and I was learning its language. The gallery pitch was Elias's crucible, and I made sure it burned. Helen had called me the day before, her voice clipped. "Elias's references didn't check out," she said. "One client said he missed deadlines. Another called him unreliable. I'm passing on his show." I murmured sympathy, my pulse steady, though inside I was a furnace. I'd spent days crafting those whispers. Anonymous emails to his past clients, vague but damning, sent from burner accounts. Nothing traceable, just enough to tilt the scales. Elias wouldn't know why his dream collapsed, only that it had, and that was the point. To strip him of what he valued most, the way he'd taken Clara's heart from me. I watched Clara that evening, searching for cracks in her facade. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, her movements sharp, distracted. "Rough day?" I asked, leaning against the counter. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Just work stuff." I wondered if Elias had told her about the gallery, if she'd soothed him, her hands on his as she once did mine. The thought was a splinter, but I swallowed it, keeping my voice warm. "You'll figure it out," I said, and she smiled, faint, unaware I was dismantling her other life. The receipt I'd left out hadn't come up again. She thought she'd buried that lie, but I was digging up others. I checked her texts later, when she was showering, the steam curling from the bathroom like a ghost. Elias had written, "Gallery fell through. I'm gutted." Her reply was long, comforting, promising they'd find another way. "You're brilliant," she wrote, and I felt the words like a slap. Brilliant. Had she ever called me that? I scrolled further, finding plans for their getaway. Next weekend, the cabin in the Blue Ridge, a stolen slice of time she'd framed as a conference for me. My hands shook as I closed the app, but my mind was clear. I'd let them have their trip, but it would be their undoing. The next day, I visited a pawn shop across town, a place I'd never been. I bought a cheap camera, nothing fancy, just enough to capture what I needed. I wasn't sure how I'd use it yet, but the weight of it in my hands felt right, like a tool for justice. I drove to Elias's loft, parking far enough to stay unseen, and watched. He was there, pacing, phone to his ear, his face drawn. I snapped a photo, not for proof but for me, a reminder of his fall. I imagined showing it to Clara one day, her lover diminished, his charm cracked. Not yet, though. The trap was still forming. At home, Lila was sprawled on the couch, sketching. "Dad, you're spacey lately," she said, pencil pausing. I forced a laugh, sitting beside her. "Just old man thoughts." She rolled her eyes but showed me her drawing. A forest, dark and tangled. "It's for Mom," she said, and my chest ached. Lila didn't know her mother was slipping away, building a world where we didn't fit. I hugged her, promising myself she'd come through this, no matter what I had to do. Clara came home late, claiming a deadline, her eyes tired but bright. I wondered if she'd been with him, consoling his failure. I didn't ask. I poured her wine, smiled, and waited. That night I refined the plan. Elias's career was wobbling, but I wasn't done. I found his next gig, a shoot for a local magazine, small but visible. I contacted the editor anonymously, suggesting they double-check his portfolio for discrepancies. I didn't know what they'd find, but doubt was enough. For Clara, I kept the pressure subtle. Another anonymous note to her boss, hinting at missed meetings. Her firm was calling her in for reviews, and I saw the strain in her jaw, the way she checked her phone too often. I was a shadow in their lives, unseen but heavy, and I wasn't stopping until they felt every ounce of my pain. The weekend of their getaway loomed like a storm cloud, and I let it approach, my calm a mask honed to perfection. Clara packed on Thursday, her suitcase open on our bed, filled with clothes I didn't recognize. Soft sweaters, a scarf I hadn't bought her. "Conference is in Raleigh," she said, folding a skirt. Her voice steady but her eyes elsewhere. I nodded, leaning in the doorway, my arms crossed. "Sounds fun," I said, and she laughed, a sound that used to warm me but now felt like a blade. I knew the truth, the cabin's address, Elias's car, their plan to vanish for 2 nights while I played the fool. I didn't stop her. Instead, I helped, carrying her bag to the car Friday morning, kissing her cheek as Lila waved from the porch. "Be safe," I said, my smile a mirror of hers. False practiced. She drove off and I took Lila to soccer practice, the routine grounding me. But my mind was on the Blue Ridge, on the cabin nestled in pines, where Clara thought she'd find something better than us. I'd rented a car that morning, a gray sedan nobody would notice, and packed the pawn shop camera, a notebook, a flashlight. I wasn't sure what I'd do, but I needed to see it, to etch their betrayal into something tangible. I told Lila I had a delivery upstate, leaving her with my sister for the weekend. She hugged me, oblivious, and I drove north, the mountains rising like judges. The cabin was remote, a dirt road winding to it, and I parked a mile away, hiking through dusk's chill. I found a ridge overlooking the property, the cabin's lights glowing below, warm and mocking. Clara's car was there, Elias's beside it. I crouched, the camera's lens cold against my eye, and waited. They appeared on the porch, her arm around his waist, his lips brushing her forehead. Click. The shutter was soft, but it felt like a hammer. Click. Her laugh carried, sharp and free. Click. They went inside, the door closing, and I stayed, the night swallowing me. I didn't sleep. I sat on that ridge, the photos in my lap, each one a weight I'd carry back. I imagined storming the cabin, breaking their illusion, but that was too easy. Revenge needed roots, deep and twisting, to choke them slowly. I drove home at dawn, the sedan's hum my only company, and hid the camera in my workshop, the film undeveloped but alive in my mind. Clara texted me, a lie about a great keynote, and I replied, glad you're enjoying it. My fingers steady. She'd never know I'd been there, a ghost in their stolen world. Monday, she returned, her face bright, her stories polished. Raleigh was inspiring, she said over dinner, Lila hanging on her words. I nodded, cutting my steak, my eyes on her hands that had touched him, built a life apart. I wondered if she felt him still, if his scent lingered on her skin. The thought fueled me and I escalated. I sent the magazine editor another note, this time with a doctored screenshot, Elias's portfolio, altered to show duplicated images. It was risky, but clean, and by Wednesday I heard he'd lost the gig. Clara's firm called her in again, her reviews piling up, and I saw her fraying. Late nights, sharp sighs, her lavender neglected. I was unraveling them thread by thread, and it felt like justice. That night, I sat with Lila, helping with her math homework. Her trust was a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. But in my workshop, alone, I opened the notebook I'd carried to the cabin, sketching their downfall. Elias's career was crumbling. Clara's job was teetering. The photos waited, a bomb I'd detonate when the time was right. I wasn't done. Every lie they told, every moment they stole would cost them. I closed the notebook, the plan clearer now, and smiled into the dark, knowing they'd never see me coming. Clara started breaking, though she hid it well. Her mornings were rushed, her coffee left half drunk, her eyes shadowed with worry. Work's intense, she'd say, brushing off my questions. But I saw the cracks. Her phone buzzing more, her replies to Elias shorter, strained. I read them at night, her passcode still unchanged. A small arrogance I exploited. Boss is on me, she wrote him. Need a break. His response was curt. Same. Everything's falling apart. I savored their unease, knowing I'd stirred it. The magazine had dropped him, citing trust issues, and Clara's firm had her on probation. My anonymous notes doing their work. I kept my routine steady, restoring furniture, driving Lila to school, cooking dinner. Each act was a brick in the wall I showed the world, hiding the man I'd become. I wasn't cruel, not yet, but I was precise, a craftsman of consequence. I found Elias's next move, a workshop he was teaching, a last grab at credibility. I enrolled under a false name, paid in cash, and attended, sitting in the back, my cap low. He stood at the front, his charm dimmed, his hands shaky as he adjusted lenses. I asked a question, my voice disguised, about ethics in art. His answer faltered, and I saw sweat on his brow. I left early, but not before slipping a note to the organizer, hinting at concerns about his professionalism. By week's end, the workshop was canceled. At home, Clara was quieter, her sketches darker, like the ones I'd found months ago. I left another clue. A map of the Blue Ridge, folded on her desk, the cabin's road circled faintly. Found this in the truck, I said casual, watching her freeze. Must have been from a hike, she mumbled, tucking it away. Her lies were thinning, and I wondered if she sensed the net closing. I didn't confront her. I wanted her to stew, to feel the weight of her choices without knowing why. Lila noticed, too, asking, Is Mom okay? I hugged her, saying, She's just stressed. But my heart twisted. Lila deserved better, and I'd make sure she got it, even if it meant tearing down the mother she loved. I escalated with Elias, targeting his network. I found his collaborators online, photographers and curators, and sent anonymous tips subtle about missed deadlines, borrowed ideas. Nothing provable, but gossip spreads like fire. His bookings dried up, his name whispered in the wrong circles. I checked his social media, now sparse, his confidence replaced with vague posts about rough patches. Clara's texts to him grew desperate. We'll get through this. I hated her loyalty to him, the way she clung to a sinking ship while our home drifted. But I used it, planning my next move, a way to expose them without breaking Lila's world. One evening, I took Lila to a movie, a rare escape. She laughed, popcorn spilling, and I held on to the moment, knowing it might be one of the last before everything changed. Back home, Clara was on the couch, her laptop open, her face pale. "Everything okay?" I asked, my tone light. She nodded, closing the screen too fast. I didn't push. I knew she'd seen another email from her boss, questioning her focus. My notes were relentless, and her career, her pride, was buckling. I poured her tea, my hands steady, and sat beside her, the husband she thought she knew. Inside, I was carving their punishment each step colder, clearer. That night, I developed the cabin photos in a friend's darkroom. A favor called in. The images emerged. Clara and Elias, framed in betrayal, her smile a wound I'd never unsee. I locked them in a safe, not ready to use them but knowing I would. The plan was evolving, no longer just about their pain but about truth. Lila's, mine, the world's. I wasn't a destroyer, I told myself, but a restorer, stripping away lies to reveal what was real. As I cleaned my tools, the workshop silent, I felt the end approaching, a reckoning they'd built with every stolen glance. Clara's unraveling was a slow bleed, and I watched it with a mix of pity and resolve. She forgot things, Lila's game schedule, a grocery list, my birthday. Her lavender wilted, the garden a mirror of her neglect. I didn't tend it. Let it be her mess, like the one she'd made of us. Her phone was still my window, though she'd changed her passcode. Lila's birthday plus a digit. A weak defense I cracked in minutes. Elias's messages were sparse now, his tone bitter. Can't catch a break. Hers were softer, pleading, "We'll fix this." Fix what, I wondered, his career, their affair, or the guilt she carried like a stone. I pushed harder, my moves surgical. Elias had one last gig. A small exhibit at a community center, a scrap of his former dreams. I visited the center, posing as a donor, and met the curator, a kind woman named Ruth. Over tea, I mentioned Elias, my tone concerned. "Heard he's had issues," I said, vague but heavy. Ruth frowned, noting it down. I donated $100, enough to linger in her mind, and left. Days later, the exhibit was reassigned, Elias's name scrubbed. I imagined his face, the smugness gone, and felt a flicker of satisfaction. Not joy, but balance, like leveling a warped table. Clara's firm called her in again, and she came home shaken, her eyes red. "They're cutting my hours," she said, her voice thin. I hugged her, my arms a lie, and murmured, "That's rough." I didn't ask why. My notes had done their work, painting her as distracted, unreliable. Her colleagues were whispering, her reputation fraying, and I knew she felt it, a cage tightening. She clung to Elias, their texts planning a meetup at the Saffron Vale, a desperate grasp at what they'd had. I let them plan, knowing I'd be there, unseen, the camera ready. I took Lila camping that weekend, a break from the storm. We pitched a tent by a creek, her laughter echoing as we roasted marshmallows. "You're the best, Dad," she said, her face glowing. I held her words like a talisman, knowing what lay ahead might scar her. Back home, I drove to the cafe, parking across the street. Clara and Elias sat by the window, their faces tense, no longer the lovers I'd seen months ago. Click. Her hand reached for his, but he pulled back. Click. His jaw was tight, her eyes wet. Click. The camera caught their fracture, and I felt the scales tip further. They left separately, her car slow, his fast, as if fleeing. At home, I hid the new photos, my safe a vault of their shame. Clara was quiet, claiming a headache, and I didn't press. I cooked for Lila, helped with her history project, kept the house warm. But my workshop was my refuge, where I planned the endgame. I'd learned Elias was pitching a book, a photo collection, his last gamble. I found the publisher online, a small press, and sent a package, anonymous, with altered images from his portfolio suggesting plagiarism. It was a lie, but lies were their currency, and I was fluent now. Clara's job hung by a thread. One more push, and she'd lose it. I wasn't cruel, I was justice, reshaping their world to match mine. That night, Lila showed me a photo she'd taken. A sunset, vivid and raw. "Mom taught me framing," she said, proud. I nodded, my throat tight, hating Clara's mark on her. I tucked Lila in, her trust a weight I carried, and sat alone, the house creaking. The photos, the notes, the lies, they were tools, but the end was near. I imagined Clara's face when she saw the truth. Elias's when he had nothing left. Revenge wasn't a shout. It was a chisel, carving their lives to fit their choices. I closed my eyes, the plan a map in my mind, leading to a reckoning that would leave no one untouched. The end was a shape now, solid and close, like a piece of furniture I'd sanded to its final form. Clara's world was crumbling. She'd lost another client at work, her boss's emails sharp with ultimatums. I read them through her account, my access still unnoticed, her passcode a door she hadn't locked. Elias was a ghost of himself, his book deal stalled, the publisher spooked by my package. Their texts were rare, strained, love replaced by blame. "You're not here for me," he wrote once. She didn't reply, and I felt the rift widening, a chasm I dug with steady hands. I kept my life steady for Lila. School runs, pizza nights, helping her build that treehouse. She climbed its ladder, grinning, and I anchored her joy, knowing it might splinter soon. Clara was distracted, her sketches abandoned, her garden dead. I left another clue. A postcard from the Blue Ridge, slipped into her bag, blank but heavy. She found it one morning, her hands shaking as she stuffed it away, her eyes darting to mine. "Junk mail," she muttered. But I saw fear, a crack in her armor. I smiled, offering coffee, my kindness a blade she didn't feel. I planned the final strike, a moment to unveil their lies without breaking Lila's heart. I contacted a local printer, a man I'd worked with on frames, and ordered a small run of photos. Not the cabin ones, not yet, but images from the Saffron Vale, their hands touching, their smiles private. I had them framed, simple black wood, and stored them in my workshop, a gallery of betrayal waiting for its audience. I wasn't sure how I'd use them. Maybe a package to her firm, maybe a display for Elias's few remaining contacts. But they were ready, a truth I'd wield when the moment came. One evening, Clara snapped, her voice sharp over dinner. "You're always watching me," she said, fork clattering. Lila froze, eyes wide, and I stayed calm, my pulse even. "Just worried," I said, my tone soft. "You seem off." She deflated, mumbling an apology, and Lila changed the subject, talking about school. I saw the guilt in Clara's eyes, a flicker of the woman I'd loved, but it wasn't enough. She'd chosen him, built a life on lies, and I'd make sure she carried the cost. Later, I heard her crying in the bathroom, the door locked, and I didn't knock. Let her drown in it. Elias's last thread was a mentorship program, a chance to teach at a community college. I found the dean's email, sent a dossier, anonymous, detailed, with screenshots of his canceled gigs, my altered portfolio images, a narrative of failure. The program dropped him within days, and I imagined his despair, alone in his loft, his cameras collecting dust. Clara's texts to him stopped, her silence louder than words. I checked her email, finding a resignation draft, unsent, her career on the brink. I'd pushed them to the edge, and now I'd let them fall. That night, I sat with Lila, reading her favorite book, her head on my shoulder. She was my reason, my boundary, the line I wouldn't cross. But Clara and Elias had no such shield. They'd built their ruin, and I was its architect. In my workshop, I opened the safe, the photos await in my hands. The framed images waited, their moment near. I didn't know the exact day, but it was coming. An unveiling that would strip them bare, leaving nothing but truth. I locked the safe, cleaned my tools, and walked into the house, the husband they thought they knew. Clara slept, her face peaceful, unaware of the storm I'd become. I stood in the doorway, watching her breathe, and felt the cold certainty of what I'd do. The precipice was here, and I was ready to push. The air in our house felt brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. Clara was a shadow of herself, her eyes hollow, her hands fidgeting, her lavender garden a graveyard of neglect. She'd resigned from her firm the day before, a decision I'd read about in her unsent email before she hit send. Personal reasons, she'd written, but I knew the truth. My notes had eroded her standing, her lies had fractured her focus, and Elias's collapse had drained her fight. She told me over breakfast, her voice flat, Lila at school and unaware. "I'm taking a break," she said, staring at her coffee. I nodded, my face a mask of concern. "You'll bounce back," I lied, knowing she wouldn't. Not from what was coming. I'd finalized the plan. Every piece aligned like a restored table, its joints flawless. The framed photos from the Saffron Vale sat in my workshop, their black frames stark against the truth they held. Clara and Elias, laughing, touching, a world they built behind my back. I'd added one more, from the cabin. Her smile on that porch, a wound I'd never unsee. I didn't plan to show Lila, not directly, but Clara would face them, and so would Elias. I contacted a courier, a discreet service I'd used for deliveries, and arranged for 2 packages. One to Elias's loft, one to Clara's old office, addressed to her former boss. The photos would tell their story, no note needed. That afternoon, I drove to Elias's loft, the camera in my bag, a final act of observation. He was outside, loading boxes into a van, his face gaunt, his charm gone. I snapped a photo from my truck. Him, diminished, a man who'd lost everything. His mentorship had collapsed, his network had shunned him, his dreams were ash. I'd done that, not with fists but with whispers, each one a cut. I didn't pity him. He'd taken Clara's heart, my trust, and I'd taken his world in return. I drove away, the image stored, a trophy I didn't need but wanted. At home, Clara was sketching, her lines frantic, a chaos of ink. "For Lila," she said when I asked, her voice thin. I wondered if she felt the end, if her guilt whispered what I knew. I kept up the act, dinner, laughter, helping Lila with her treehouse plans. But my mind was on the courier, the packages moving through the city, set to arrive tomorrow. I checked Clara's phone that night, her passcode still mine to exploit. No texts from Elias, just a draft to him, unsent. I can't do this anymore. I smiled, cold and steady. She was breaking, and I was the tide pulling her under. Lila sensed the tension, her eyes searching mine at bedtime. "Is Mom sad?" she asked, clutching her book. I hugged her, promising everything would be okay, though I knew it wouldn't, not for Clara. I tucked her in, her trust my anchor, and walked to my workshop. The safe was open, the photos gone, already en route. I felt no doubt, only clarity, like sanding wood to its grain. The unveiling was tomorrow, and I'd watch it unfold, the husband they thought they knew. Clara slept, her breathing soft, unaware of the storm I'd unleashed. I stood in our room watching her and felt the weight lift. Not forgiveness, but purpose. The next morning, I drove Lila to school, my routine unbroken. Clara was quiet, sipping tea, her eyes on her sketchbook. I kissed her cheek, my lips awry, and left for a delivery. I parked near Elias's loft, waiting. The courier arrived at 10, a plain box left at his door. I imagined him opening it, seeing the photos, his failure framed in black. Clara's package would hit her office by noon, her boss's hands unfolding her shame. I drove home, the city alive around me, and felt the first tremor of what I'd built. A reckoning, not loud, but eternal. The house was quiet when I returned, Clara gone, her car missing. I didn't call her. I knew where she was headed, her office. Maybe Elias, chasing the pieces of her crumbling world. I sat in my workshop, the safe empty, the camera still, and waited. My phone buzzed at noon. A text from Mark, my friend who'd helped early on. "Heard Clara's firm got a weird delivery," he wrote. "Photos. People are talking." I didn't reply. The ripple was spreading, just as I'd planned. Her colleagues would whisper, her reputation would fracture, and she'd know why, even if she didn't know how. Clara came home at 3, her face pale, her hands shaking as she dropped her bag. "Daniel," she said, her voice a thread, "we need to talk." I leaned against the counter, my pulse even, and nodded. "Sure." She sat, her eyes darting, and started, haltingly, about work, stress, mistakes. No mention of Elias, no confession, just a plea for understanding. I listened, my face calm, though inside I was a furnace. She thought she could salvage this, rewrite her story, but the photos were out there, framing her truth. "I'm sorry," she said finally, tears falling. I touched her hand, my gesture hollow. "We'll figure it out," I said, knowing we wouldn't. Lila was at a friend's, a mercy I'd arranged. I didn't want her here for this. Clara's phone buzzed, ignored, but I'd seen the notifications. Texts from coworkers, vague but pointed, asking about rumors. She didn't answer, her fingers twisting her wedding ring, a habit I'd once loved. I wondered if Elias had opened his package, if he'd seen the cafe, the cabin, his failure reflected in her smile. I didn't ask. I poured her water, my kindness a trap, and waited for the next wave. She'd left her sketchbook open, a drawing of Lila half finished, and I felt a pang. Not for Clara, but for what Lila would lose. By evening, the storm hit. Clara's phone rang, her boss, then a friend from the firm, then silence. She listened, her face crumpling, and hung up, staring at me. Someone sent photos, she whispered. To work. Me and someone. I raised an eyebrow, my voice steady. Someone. She flinched, caught, and shook her head, mumbling about misunderstandings. I didn't push. The lie was hers to carry, and it was heavy now, sinking her. I cooked dinner, the act grounding, and called Lila home, keeping the night normal for her. Clara barely ate, her eyes distant, and I knew she was seeing the photos, imagining who'd sent them. That night, I checked her phone, her passcode unchanged despite everything. Elias had texted, "Who did this?" No reply. I imagined him alone, his loft empty, his cameras useless. I'd stripped him bare. Career, pride, Clara, and he'd never know my name. Clara slept fitfully, her breathing jagged, and I lay beside her, awake, the plan nearly complete. The photos were my chisel, carving their shame into the world. But one piece remained, a final stroke to make them feel my pain. I thought of Lila, her treehouse waiting, and hardened my resolve. Clara had chosen this, and I'd finish what she'd started. The next day, Clara was a ghost, moving through the house, avoiding me. I took Lila to soccer, her laughter a shield against the chaos. When we returned, Clara was packing, her suitcase open, her eyes red. "I need space," she said, not looking at me. I nodded, my voice soft. "If that's what you need." She paused, searching my face, but I gave her nothing. She'd see the truth soon. Not from me, but from the world I'd reshaped. I drove to my workshop after she left, the photos' echoes still ringing, and began the final act, a revenge so quiet it would scream forever. Clara's absence was a void, but I filled it with routine, Lila's school, my workshop, dinners where I laughed for her sake. She asked about her mom, her voice small, and I said, "She's figuring things out," hating the half-truth but guarding her heart. Clara had texted once, vague, saying she was staying with a friend. I didn't reply. I knew she'd gone to Elias, chasing a lifeline that wasn't there. My packages had done their work, her firm had let her go, citing unprofessional conduct, and Elias's name was mud, his last contacts turning away. The photos were whispers now, spreading through their circles, framing their betrayal for all to see. I escalated, one final push to seal their ruin. I'd kept a photo back, the cabin's porch, Clara's lips on Elias's cheek, her eyes alive with a joy she'd never shown me. I printed it large, no frame, and mailed it to her parents, anonymous, with a note. She chose this. They'd always loved me, called me son, and I knew their disappointment would cut deeper than mine. Clara's family was her anchor, her pride, and I'd turn it against her, let their judgment mirror my own. I sent another copy to Elias's sister, a woman I'd found online, her address public. "Your brother's truth," I wrote, nothing more. Let them both drown in their shame. The ripples grew. Clara's mother called me, her voice trembling. "Daniel, what's happened?" she asked. I played the wounded husband, vague but heavy. Clara had drifted, I said, made choices I couldn't fix. I didn't mention the photos, didn't need to. She'd seen them, and I heard her heart break, a mirror of mine. I hung up, my hand steady, and checked Clara's email, still open to me. Messages from friends, cousins, all asking why, what, who. She hadn't answered, her silence a confession. Elias's sister had posted online, a cryptic rant about betrayers. And I knew he felt it too, his family turning. Lila was my focus, her world still whole. I took her to the treehouse, hammering planks as she painted, her giggles a lifeline. "Mom will love this," she said, and I nodded, though I knew Clara might never see it. I'd protect Lila from the fallout, let her keep her mother's image a while longer. But Clara's world was collapsing. Her reputation, her family, her lover, all gone. I'd stripped her bare, not with shouts but with truth. Each photo a mirror she couldn't escape. Elias was worse, a man with nothing, his loft for sale, his name erased. I carved them down and it felt like balance. That evening, I sat in my workshop, the camera cleaned, the safe empty. The photos had done their work, but I wasn't done. I planned a final act, not for them but for me, a way to close the wound without breaking Lila. Clara texted again, asking to talk, and I agreed, setting a time tomorrow, neutral ground. I didn't know what she'd say, but I'd listen, my face calm, my heart cold. She'd see the husband she'd betrayed, not the architect of her fall, and that was my victory. I locked the workshop, the night quiet, and felt the end settle, a peace restored, its cracks invisible but deep. The next morning I drove Lila to school, her chatter a shield. Clara waited at a cafe, not the Saffron Vale, never that, a small place with bare tables. She looked small, her hair loose, her eyes red. I messed up, she started, her voice breaking. I listened, nodding, as she spoke of stress, mistakes, Elias a friend who'd blurred lines. No mention of the photos, but I saw their weight in her slump, her trembling hands. I said little, my words soft, letting her unravel. She didn't know I'd sent the truth to her world, didn't know I'd won. I left her there, promising to talk later, and drove away, the final act ready, a cruelty she'd never traced to me. Clara's confession was a half-truth, a plea for forgiveness she didn't earn. I met her again, this time at home, Lila at a sleepover I'd planned. Clara sat on our couch, her suitcase by the door, her eyes searching mine. I want to fix this, she said, her voice raw. For Lila, for us. I leaned back, my hands folded, and let her talk. About regret, confusion, Elias a mistake she'd ended. She didn't know I'd read their final texts, her cutting him off, his begging for another chance. She didn't know I'd seen her parents' email, disowning her until she made amends. She thought she could rebuild, but I'd burned the foundation. I nodded, my face neutral, and asked, "What did you choose, Clara?" She flinched, caught, and mumbled about needing space. Not him. I didn't push. She'd already lost her job, her family, her lover, her name. The photos had spread, whispers turning to shouts, her shame a public scar. Elias was worse, his loft sold, his career dust, his sister's post a viral wound. I'd done that, my hands clean, my tools silent. But one act remained, a stroke to seal their pain. Not for Lila's eyes, but for theirs. A mirror they'd carry forever. I prepared it days ago, a final package. I'd collected their lies, texts I'd screenshot, emails I'd saved, the cabin's reservation, every moment they'd stolen. I compiled them into a book, printed at a shop across town. Its cover plain, its pages a chronicle of betrayal. I titled it What You Chose, simple, sharp. I sent one copy to Elias's new address, a cheap rental I'd found online, and another to Clara's friend, the one she'd stayed with, ensuring she'd see it. No note, no sender, just their story, raw and unsparing. A truth they couldn't burn. That night, Clara stayed in a hotel, her choice, she said, to give me space. I agreed, my voice warm, my heart ice. I sat in my workshop, the book's proof copy in my hands, its weight a bomb. I'd included the photos, small but clear, each one a nail in their shared dream. I imagined Clara opening it, her hands shaking, seeing her lies laid bare. Elias, too, alone in his bare apartment, reading his failure, knowing no gallery would touch him again. They'd blame each other or fate, never me. The husband who'd loved, trusted, restored. I'd rebuilt myself, not them, and that was enough. Lila came home the next day, her smile bright, oblivious to the storm. I took her to the treehouse, its ladder sturdy, her paint vivid on its walls. "Mom will come back, right?" she asked, her voice small. I hugged her, promising we'd be okay, and meant it. Clara would return, maybe, but not as she was. Her world was ash, her choices a cage I'd locked. I didn't need her love anymore. I had Lila's, my work, my truth. The book was my final cut, a wound they'd carry, its pages their mirror, their shame, their end. I drove to the cafe later, not theirs but mine, a place of quiet tables. I sat, coffee in hand, and felt the weight lift. Clara's parents had emailed me, offering support, Lila their focus now. Elias's sister had called him a stranger, her words public. Their lives were splinters and I'd swept them clean. I didn't gloat. I mourned briefly the life I'd thought we had. But morning passed, and I was whole, my hands steady, my tools sharp. The book was out there, its truth eternal, and I was done, the craftsman who'd carved justice from pain. Months passed, and the house was ours. Lila's and mine, its creaks familiar, its warmth rebuilt. Clara lived across town, a small apartment, her visits to Lila planned, polite, her eyes carrying a weight I didn't soften. The book had landed, though she never spoke of it, nor did Elias. I'd heard he'd left Asheville, a broken man, his cameras sold, his name forgotten. Clara's parents welcomed Lila. Not her. Their love conditional now, my photos their guide. Her career hadn't recovered. Freelance work? Sparse and unsteady. Her reputation a shadow. I'd done that. My hands invisible. My heart cold but clear. Lila thrived. Her treehouse a sanctuary. Her laughter my compass. She asked about Clara. Sometimes, and I answered gently, shielding her from the book, the photos, the truth. Clara was her mother. Flawed but hers. And I let that bond live, though I watched it closely. I restored furniture. My workshop alive. Each piece a story I coaxed free, like I'd coaxed my life from ruin. Clients praised my work, my hands steady, my focus sharp. I didn't need Clara's love, nor her lies. I had Lila, my craft, myself. The book was my cruelest act. Its pages a wound they'd never close. I'd heard Clara had found it, her friend confessing its arrival, its weight breaking their bond. Elias, too, had vanished after reading, his rental empty, his sister's silence loud. They'd seen their choices, framed in ink, and I knew it haunted them. Not my name, but their own. I didn't need to see their pain. I felt it, a balance restored, like leveling a table's legs. They'd betrayed, and I'd rebuilt. My revenge a whisper that echoed forever. One evening, Lila showed me a drawing. A family, 3 figures, the third faint like a ghost. "It's us," she said, hesitant. I hugged her, my throat tight, and promised we were enough. Clara called later, asking to see Lila, her voice small. I agreed, setting boundaries, my tone firm. She didn't fight. She knew the cost of her choices, the book her mirror. I hung up, the night quiet, and walked to my workshop. The safe was empty, the camera sold, the photos ash in my mind. Their work done. I took Lila camping that weekend. The creek we loved, her laughter brighter than firelight. She caught a fish, her pride a spark, and I cheered, my heart full. The stars were clear, the air crisp, and I felt the past settle, a piece polished to its grain. Clara's betrayal had carved me, but I'd carved back, my tools truth and time. Elias was gone. Clara diminished. Their world a splinter I'd swept away. I didn't hate them. I pitied them briefly, then let it go, my hands clean, my life whole. Back home, I restored a chair. Its wood warm under my fingers, its story mine to tell. Lila slept, her room a glow of trust, and I sat in the garden, Clara's lavender gone, my herbs thriving. The house was ours, its cracks filled, its heart steady. I thought of the book, its pages their cage, and felt no regret. Revenge wasn't loud. It was art, a craft I'd mastered, leaving them to their truth while I built mine. I looked at the stars, Lila's drawing in my pocket, and knew I'd won. Not their pain, but my peace, restored, unbreakable mine.